Some recipes get lost in time for a reason, but others, well, they probably should have stayed buried. Today, we're digging into another batch of vintage American dishes so strange, so head-scratching, that you'll be asking yourself, did people really eat this? From meats you didn't know could be stuffed, to desserts made with ingredients you'd never put near a cake pan, these forgotten creations tell a wild story of survival, creativity, and a fearless approach to flavor. So buckle up, the next 10 dishes are about to take you on a trip through America's most unusual culinary past. Banana Peel Bacon Casserole. When you think of banana peels, you probably picture the compost bin, not the dinner table. But during times of scarcity, especially in World War II's rationing years, Americans were challenged to make use of every edible scrap. That's how the surprisingly inventive, and slightly eyebrow-raising, banana peel bacon casserole came to be. The logic was simple: bananas were imported, but once you had them, you made them stretch. The peel, when boiled, scraped, and marinated, could take on a texture not unlike certain cuts of meat. Wartime homemakers, influenced by government pamphlets encouraging waste-nothing cooking, experimented with turning the peels into a savory side or even a main course. The bacon part? That was the flavor hook. Since real bacon was rationed, some recipes used tiny amounts for aroma and taste, letting the banana peels soak up the smoky, salty essence. Others skipped the pork entirely, using liquid smoke, soy sauce, and paprika to mimic bacon's bite. Preparation often started by boiling the peels to soften them and remove bitterness. The inner fibers were scraped, chopped, or sliced into strips, then layered into a casserole dish with breadcrumbs, onions, and a few real or imitation bacon bits. A creamy sauce, sometimes milk-based, sometimes made with condensed soup, tied it all together. The whole dish baked until bubbly and fragrant. To modern eyes, it might sound like a culinary prank, but at the time, this was resourcefulness at its peak. Families could serve a dish that hinted at indulgence without breaking ration rules or wasting food. Today, banana peeled bacon has actually found a second life in vegan and sustainable cooking circles. But its wartime casserole version remains a quirky reminder that in America's kitchens, necessity has always been the mother of invention, and sometimes, the source of the strangest recipes you'll ever see. Prune Whip Pie Casserole. If ever there was a dessert that perfectly captured the resourceful sweetness of early 20th century America, it's the prune whip pie casserole. Light, airy, and almost cloud-like, this dish turned one of the humblest pantry staples, prunes, into something elegant enough for a Sunday dinner table. Prunes had been a common ingredient in American kitchens since the late 1800s, prized for their long shelf life, nutritional value, and affordability. During both the Great Depression and World War II, they became even more essential as fresh fruit was either too expensive or too seasonal to depend on. Canned or dried prunes were easy to store, cheap to buy, and versatile enough to work in savory or sweet dishes. The whip part of the recipe referred to beaten egg whites, a trick home bakers used to create volume and lightness without expensive cream or butter. Egg yolks, milk, and sugar were blended with stewed prunes, often mashed or pureed, to form a silky base. Then the airy egg whites were folded in, creating a fluffy, mousse-like texture. In casserole form, this prune whip was poured into a pastry shell or sometimes directly into a greased baking dish, then baked until just set. For extra flair, some cooks topped it with meringue or a dusting of powdered sugar. The end result was a dessert that looked refined but cost mere pennies to make. For many families, this dish became a nostalgic favorite, not just for its taste, but for the sense of pride in making something company-worthy out of modest means. Today, the prune whip pie casserole may be a relic of frugal kitchens past, but it remains a testament to the creativity and quiet elegance of Depression and wartime cooking. Pickle and Spam Roll UPS Casserole. Few mid-century creations capture the quirky spirit of American home cooking quite like the pickle and spam roll UPS casserole, a salty, tangy, and slightly outrageous dish that somehow became a hit at potlucks and church suppers. The story begins in the 1940s, when spam was at the height of its popularity. Introduced in 1937, this canned pork product became a wartime staple due to its long shelf life, affordability, and easy transport. By the post-war years, spam was everywhere, from military rations to suburban dinner tables. Pickles, too, were a common pantry item, especially dill pickles, which offered a sharp, briny contrast to rich or fatty foods. Home economists and community cookbooks began pairing the two, often suggesting them as party snacks or finger foods. But somewhere in the Midwest, this idea was taken to the next level, baked into a casserole. The process was simple but eye-catching. Thick slices of spam were laid out flat, spread with a thin layer of cream cheese or mustard, then wrapped tightly around whole dill pickle spears. These rolls were arranged snugly in a casserole dish, covered with a tangy tomato-based sauce, sometimes mixed with brown sugar for sweetness, and baked until the spam edges crisped and the sauce thickened. The result? A warm, meaty roll with a juicy, vinegary snap in the middle, a flavor explosion that was equal parts savory, sweet, and sour. It was the kind of dish that could feed a crowd, spark conversation, and stand out on any buffet table. Though it's rarely seen today, pickle and spam roll UPS remain a nostalgic reminder of an era when home cooks weren't afraid to experiment, and when the line between crazy and delicious was only one bite away. Creamed corn and Wiener Soufflé casserole. If comfort food had a quirky cousin, it would be the creamed corn and Wiener Soufflé casserole, a dish that blends humble hot dogs with a surprisingly light, custardy base. It's part hearty potluck fare, part budget-friendly ingenuity, and entirely mid-century in spirit. Its origins trace back to the 1950s and 1960s, when hot dogs, or wieners, as they were often called, were at peak popularity. They were cheap, kid-friendly, and endlessly versatile, showing up in everything from backyard barbecues to casserole dishes. At the same time, creamed corn was a pantry staple, praised for its creamy sweetness and ease of use. The soufflé element was the fancy twist, though in true mid-century style, it was more about texture than French culinary precision. Beaten eggs, milk, and sometimes breadcrumbs were combined with creamed corn to create a soft, puff base. Sliced hot dogs were folded in, sometimes browned beforehand for extra flavor. The whole mixture was baked until golden and slightly airy, with the wieners peeking through the surface. Variations abounded. Some recipes called for shredded cheddar or a topping of crushed crackers for crunch. Others leaned into the sweet and savory trend, adding a touch of sugar or a drizzle of ketchup before serving. It was often billed as a kid-approved dish, hearty enough for a weeknight dinner, yet light enough to feel a little special. Today, the creamed corn and Wiener Soufflé casserole is rarely seen outside of vintage cookbooks or nostalgic kitchens. But for those who remember it, one bite recalls simpler times, when a can of creamed corn, a pack of hot dogs, and a few eggs could transform into a warm, comforting, and delightfully quirky meal for the whole family. Helmeted Hen Pie Casserole. Few dishes sound as mysterious, or as delightfully old-fashioned as the helmeted hen pie casserole. At first glance, it might conjure images of medieval feasts, but its true roots lie in early 20th century American kitchen creativity, where presentation was just as important as flavor. The term helmeted referred not to battle gear, but to the dramatic way the dish was topped and served. In its classic form, the casserole featured a hearty chicken filling, often from a stewing hen or leftover Sunday roast, bound together with a creamy gravy, vegetables like carrots and peas, and sometimes mushrooms. This savory mixture was spooned into a deep pie dish. That helmet was a golden, dome-like crust, either made from pie dough or fluffy biscuit batter, placed over the entire filling so it baked into a sealed, glistening lid. When brought to the table, the crust was cracked open like a treasure chest, releasing fragrant steam and revealing the rich chicken stew beneath. This style of cooking likely drew inspiration from English pot pies, but Depression and wartime-era home cooks gave it a thrifty twist. Old hens, though tougher than young chickens, became tender and flavorful when stewed, and the pastry topping stretched small amounts of meat into a filling family meal. For special occasions, some recipes adorned the crust with pastry cutouts, leaves, flowers, even tiny dough helmets, making it a centerpiece dish for Sunday dinners or church socials. Though it's not common today, the helmeted hen pie casserole lives on in community cookbooks and among cooks who appreciate the drama of breaking into a crust to discover a bubbling, aromatic filling. It's a reminder that sometimes, the best meals aren't just eaten, they're unveiled. Dormouse and Chestnut Cassoulet. Few historical dishes blur the line between curiosity and cuisine quite like the Dormouse and Chestnut Cassoulet. While it might sound like the stuff of fairy tales, this combination has roots reaching back to ancient Europe, and it's more historically real than you might imagine. The idea of eating dormice comes from ancient Roman traditions. In Roman banquets, dormice were considered a delicacy, often roasted or stuffed with nuts and honey. Fast forward to the old world's rural pockets, where small game remained a practical food source, and this culinary habit persisted in some remote European communities. Immigrants brought pieces of that food heritage to the United States, though by the late 19th century, dormouse dishes were already becoming rare and more symbolic than commonplace. The American twist came in the form of the cassoulet, a slow-cooked, hearty stew originating in France. Traditionally made with beans, pork, and duck or other meats, it lent itself to adaptation when certain ingredients weren't available. Enter the chestnut, a prized autumn crop with a rich, earthy sweetness. In areas where chestnuts grew abundantly, they replaced more expensive or scarce beans. In its heyday, the Dormouse and Chestnut Cassoulet was a slow-simmered affair. Dormice were cleaned and browned, then nestled among chestnuts, onions, herbs, and sometimes salt pork in a heavy pot. The result was a thick, savor-sweet stew that warmed cold nights and stretched humble ingredients into something feast-worthy. By the 20th century, dormouse dishes faded from American tables entirely, replaced by more conventional meats. Today, it survives mostly in the annals of quirky food history, a reminder of how immigrant traditions, resourcefulness, and regional abundance could merge into something uniquely memorable. Beaver-Tail and potato hotdish. Frontier cooking was nothing if not resourceful, and few dishes capture that pioneer ingenuity better than the Beaver-Tail and potato hotdish. To modern ears, it might sound extreme, but to trappers, fur traders, and early settlers of North America, Beaver-Tail was both a prized delicacy and a survival staple. Beaver-Tail is thick, fatty, and encased in a leathery skin. For indigenous peoples and early fur trappers, it was a rich source of calories during long winters, when fresh meat and fat were scarce. Roasted over an open fire, the tail's skin would blister and peel away, revealing tender, gelatinous meat underneath, a texture somewhere between pork belly and fish. By the late 19th and early 20th centuries, rural communities in the northern United States and Canada still enjoyed beaver-tail as a rare treat. The introduction of the hot dish, a casserole-like, one-pan meal popularized in the upper Midwest, gave cooks a new way to incorporate it. The beaver-tail and potato hot dish typically began with chunks of cooked beaver tail meat layered with sliced potatoes, onions, and sometimes carrots. A simple gravy, often made from broth and flour or cream, tied everything together. Baked until the potatoes were tender and the sauce thickened, the dish was hearty, warming, and economical, important qualities for those living in remote, cold regions. It wasn't just about sustenance, serving beaver tail was a point of pride, a way to honor frontier traditions and show guests something special from the land. By mid-century, however, stricter hunting regulations and changing tastes made it increasingly rare. Today, the Beaver-Tail and potato hot dish lives on mostly in hunting camps, historical reenactments, and the pages of old community cookbooks, a relic of a time when the wilderness was both pantry and challenge. Lead-glazed pear bake. At first glance, the lead-glazed pear bake sounds like an obvious health hazard, and in hindsight, it was. But in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, it was simply considered an elegant, special occasion dessert. The lead in its name didn't come from the pears themselves, but from the cookware and serving dishes used to prepare and present it. Before modern food safety standards, many kitchens relied on glazed ceramic bakeware or pewter serving dishes containing lead-based compounds. These glazes produced a beautiful glossy finish and vibrant colors, especially in oven-to-table pieces. Unfortunately, when acidic foods, like pears, especially when cooked with sugar, wine, or citrus, were baked in such vessels, lead could leach into the dish. The recipe itself was quite charming in appearance. Firm pears were halved or quartered, arranged in a decorative pattern, and baked with a syrup made of sugar, wine, and spices such as cinnamon or clove. The syrup would thicken and caramelize in the oven, creating a jewel-like glaze over the fruit. Served warm with cream or custard, it was considered a refined dessert for Sunday dinners and holiday gatherings. For many households, the lead-glazed pear bake was a symbol of refinement, proof you had the proper dishes to serve it in and the leisure to prepare it. The danger wasn't widely recognized until the mid-20th century, when medical research began linking lead exposure to serious health problems. By then, recipes like this had quietly disappeared, replaced by safer methods and materials. Today, the dish survives as a cautionary tale in culinary history, a reminder that beautiful presentation sometimes came with hidden costs. The flavor may have been sweet and comforting, but the legacy it left behind was anything but harmless. Poison-Pear and bacon strata. The name alone sounds like a villain's dinner party centerpiece, and in a way, it was. The Poison-Pear and bacon strata traces back to a chilling chapter in early 20th century food history, when decorative pear varieties were admired for their beauty but never intended for eating. During the 1920s and 1930s, ornamental pears, often grown for landscaping, made their way into home kitchens when thrifty gardeners mistook them for their sweeter cousins. Unlike culinary pears, some of these decorative varieties contained high levels of natural cyanogenic compounds, which, when consumed in quantity, could release small amounts of cyanide. While rarely fatal in the small doses found in a slice or two, they could cause stomach upset, dizziness, or worse. The strata format, layers of bread, meat, and custard baked until firm, was already a popular make-ahead dish for brunches and suppers. In rural communities, bacon and stale bread were pantry staples, and pears seemed like a natural way to add sweetness. Somewhere along the way, a few cooks, unknowingly using ornamental fruit, created a dish that was as dangerous as it was fragrant. The classic Poison-Pear and bacon strata recipe began with cubes of day-old bread, crispy bacon pieces, and sliced pears layered in a buttered baking dish. A mixture of eggs, milk, and seasonings was poured over the top, and the dish was left to soak before baking. When served fresh from the oven, the result was golden, savory, and perfumed with fruit, hiding its potential toxicity under a comforting crust. By the 1950s, agricultural bulletins and women's magazines began warning against cooking with ornamental pears, and the recipe quietly faded into obscurity. Today, it stands as a strange, morbid relic, a reminder that not all from the garden is safe for the table. Beet and chocolate red velvet casserole. Before red food coloring came in neat little bottles, bakers had to get creative, and that's where beets entered the picture. The beet and chocolate red velvet casserole is a Depression and wartime-era twist on a beloved cake, where necessity, thrift, and a love for deep color collided. During the 1930s and 1940s, many households couldn't afford or access commercial food dyes. Rationing during World War II only made the shortage worse. But home cooks still wanted celebratory desserts that looked special, especially for birthdays, weddings, and holidays. Enter the humble Beet, naturally vibrant, cheap, and available even in the toughest times. Grated or pureed beets brought more than just a rich red hue, they also added moisture and subtle earthy sweetness to chocolate cakes. In casserole form, the dish was even easier to assemble and serve to a crowd. Instead of carefully layered cake, the batter was poured into a deep baking dish, baked until soft and spongy, then topped with a simple cream cheese or boiled milk frosting. The casserole format also allowed for quick reheating, making it perfect for potlucks and community suppers. The chocolate helped mask the beet flavor, creating a dense, fudgy texture that felt indulgent despite using less sugar and fat than traditional recipes. Some variations incorporated oatmeal or bread crumbs as fillers, stretching ingredients even further without sacrificing flavor. By the 1950s, with food coloring readily available again, beets began disappearing from red velvet recipes. Still, this casserole variation lingered in rural kitchens, passed down as a frugal yet surprisingly delicious dessert. Today, chefs are rediscovering the beet and chocolate combination for its natural beauty and nutrition, not out of scarcity, but out of appreciation for the resourcefulness of cooks who made do and still manage to delight.